Hello and welcome to Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
And welcome to the show. As always, before we start, I always ask, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. And if you don't want to comment in a public forum and you just want to say write to us with some suggestions or criticisms or whatever ideas or a recipe for a good omelet, Randall, where's the best place to reach us?
Well, our Facebook page, Arts and Entertainment with Chris and Randall, is fairly popular. You know what? You can just go on Facebook and message Chris or myself. Also, check out our website, chrisandrandall.com. Various ways to reach us. I mean, we're on YouTube. We're on a bunch of places. Download our podcast.
Excellent. And about that omelet, I'll be honest with you. I think Randall, you are a much better. You're a dead solid cook.
I like cooking. I do a lot of cooking. So
I make a
let me know.
decent omelet, and I'll just say this much. This is not about the show, by the way, but I'm just like, my opinion is when you make an omelet, it's all about the cheese.
No, yes, cheese. Yeah, you got
The
it.
better the cheese, the better the omelet. Also,
Listen.
while we're on the topic of dairy, please use a very good butter. Those are my only two tips. What are your two tips before we start the show?
Yeah, cheese. You're exactly right about cheese, but you know what really is good is multiple kinds of cheese in the omelet.
Ooh.
There you go.
Well, this is why Randall's such a great cook. Okay. How we're going to get into this topic now, I'm too hungry to know. But today we're talking
You must be
about,
hungry, Chris.
I must be hungry. We're talking about Star Trek, the original series. So it's the year 2021 for reals. And, during the pandemic, I ended up watching a lot of the old Star Trek because it's comfort viewing. I grew up watching it as a kid. I believe it's one of the only shows, to my knowledge, that you can watch on both Amazon Prime and Netflix, as if that's true. And you might even be able to watch it on Hulu. I mean, it's weirdly enough, like every streaming service, to my knowledge, is offering it, and even on YouTube. So this particular episode I want to talk about, I think most of you listeners and viewers, if you want to watch it, absolutely do. Now, I promise this will be, we're going to try to keep it spoiler free. I don't think we're going to have to struggle too much to keep this one spoiler free. Even if it's not spoiler free, okay, we'll warn you if it does get to that. But it's the name of the episode. So it's called Mirror Mirror. It is the fourth episode of the second season. There was only 3 seasons on Star Trek. It came out October 6th, 1967. It was written by science fiction writer Jerome Bixby, who was a Nebula. That's one of the most prestigious science fiction award-winning science fiction writer. He won it in 1953 for a story called It's a Good Life, which was the basis for the 1961 episode of The Twilight Zone, right? The one with the boy who runs the town. Do you remember that episode?
Yeah,
Randall?
so this is one of the most famous episodes of The Twilight Zone of all time. It's the episode
remade in the Twilight Zone movie.
Yes. And The Simpsons remade it too.
Right now, this is the boy has this power, and if you disagree with him, your head will end up on like a pike in the middle of a cornfield.
They give a little boy godlike powers, and all the adults around him have to do everything he says all the time to just keep him happy. And he's just a normal kid, except he has godlike powers, so he doesn't have any kind of emotional maturity. It's a great concept. I mean, it's such an amazing idea.
Other episodes that Bixby would write for Star Trek was Day of the Dove, which is this one where Klingons and the Federation are fighting each other, not because they need to fight each other, but some sort of entity is forcing them to fight each other over and over. One called Requiem for Methuselah, about a guy who was born like in 800 BC, who lived through all of humanity and then finds himself on another planet where he has an android lover that Kirk is supposed to train in the ways of love. Okay, that didn't come out the way I meant it to be, but fine. Then there's By Any Other Name, which is this one where, again, a group of non-corporeal beings take over members of the ship. He did the movie Fantastic Voyage, which was actually an adaptation by Isaac Asimov. He died in 1999, but there is a 2007 science fiction film based on a screenplay he wrote called The Man from Earth. And you saw that, right?
Yeah, The Man from Earth is kind of an underground indie science fiction hit. It's it has a cult following. I mean, just go ahead and read the description and see if you want to watch it. I mean,
Yeah, and
read the description,
well,
and if it sounds like your cup of tea, just watch it. I mean, it's got a
maybe
huge,
we'll watch it and talk about it on a future episode.
it has a
So
huge cult
in
following.
this is a so Star Trek's a it's funny, for the older members of this are viewing and listening. Well, you guys know Star Trek pretty well because you grew up watching it. For those of you who did not grow up watching it, this is really the first big science fiction show, not an anthology show like The Twilight Zone or Outer Limits, but the first really science fiction show that was watched by adults, shown in prime time, that was a very big deal, even though it went off after only 3 seasons. So you could call this what we call today a brilliant but canceled show. And in TV, there's a term called a bottle episode. And a bottle episode is an episode that normally takes place on the pre-established sets of the show, using most of just the actual cast, maybe a couple extra side characters, maybe what they call a swing set, which is like a set that they can build quickly and cheaply. It's done to save money. Shows that do science fiction often do bottle episodes because they do other episodes with so much special effects that the budget for basically they end up doing a show that takes a lot of money out of a different episode. So that episode is operating on a deficit, which is why Star Trek had so many episodes where just something would happen on the ship because they had no money for that episode. Those sets were already built. Those actors were already under contract. So personally, whenever I'm watching TV, especially a science fiction show, and it's a bottle episode, I do not like bottle episodes. But this one is a particularly significant episode because it introduces into the Star Trek lore what they would call the mirror universe. And I think the fact that it does introduce the mirror universe, so it won't get picked up, and we'll get into it in a bit, but the concept is it's a universe. Well, let's just tell you what the plot is in a non-spoilery way. It involves a transporter malfunction that swaps Captain Kirk and his companions with their evil counterparts from a parallel universe. In this mirror universe, the Enterprise is a ship of the Terran Empire, a conquering and murdering organization where officers are assassinated as punishment and as a means of promotion. So this is, instead of the idealistic Federation, this is almost like a continuation of the Roman Empire with a little piracy involved, where, the Earth becomes this great military force that goes throughout the galaxy, just plundering all of these defenseless countries, planets, and using their force to get what they want. And then people move up the ranks basically through just murdering other people. So,
yeah, I mean, some people describe the Star Trek universe, the usual Star Trek universe, as utopian.
Yes.
And I personally don't agree with that description, but they describe it. There's obvious reasons they describe it as utopian. Because the people all work together. They don't have a lot of conflicts with each other. They're all following orders. No one's doing anything unethical. Everyone seems to follow a moral code. Now, in the mirror universe, ethics and morals don't matter. What matters is what works. What matters is
power.
Power.
Is what matters.
Everyone's Machiavellian.
Because I think you hit onto something, which is that Gene Roddenberry's conception of Star Trek, which is a very 1960s utopian view that in the future all of our problems will go away. Technology and an advanced social consciousness will free us. And the world of the Federation that was established in season 1 is one where there is no hate, there is no war, there is no money, there's no discrimination. By the way, there's rampant sexism, but no one ever notices it. That won't be tackled until the very last episode of the series. But what was my point? You're right. It allows us to see the shadow version of this. So this also, the mirror universe will be picked up later on in other Star Trek iterations. So one of the things that I find really fascinating about this episode is that Star Trek, the original series, was a very theme heavy show, meaning often episodes were very much like the Twilight Zone, a metaphysical exploration of a concept, or they were looking at what was going on in society in the day. This episode does. I'm not saying it doesn't, but you know, there's a one where one person is a black and white on one side, and then another person has got it in the opposite order, and yet they hate each other even though they're almost identical. Or there's a planet where Hitler won World War II. There's another planet where the Romans never stopped being the Romans. Or there's a planet like Stratos where the rich people live, get it, stratified up above, and the poor people live below. Star Trek was very thematic. So everything you knew about Captain Kirk was normally, whatever he did in action. He was good with women, he's quick-witted, he's decisive, he's a leader, he is in touch with his emotions, and he's ready to go. And everything you know about Spock is he's logical, and he is always going to be more reserved to Kirk, who is more impetuous. But this is a great episode because, as you said when we were on the pre-discussion, it's the most character-driven episode. It's one of the most character-driven episodes of Star Trek, right? Well, because who's in conflict in this episode, right? They're in conflict with each other, right?
Right. Yeah, so usually on Star Trek, the characters aren't fighting and feuding with each other, having arguments. In this episode, they're literally trying to kill each other like all the time.
They are literally the antagonists. Here's a little spoiler, so okay, maybe you want to watch this. But the antagonists are Spock, Sulu, and Chekhov. They're the antagonists. They're the bad guys, true? It's not our version of them, but it's the darker version of them. Now, it's funny because, there's an inversion, but, in a weird way, like, we don't. So the trade-off is, except for like a brief scene, we don't really get to see what evil Kirk looks like, or evil McCoy, or evil Scotty, or evil Uhura, except literally they're in the brig and he's just shouting crazily. But it definitely adds dimension to how, like, Kirk. So here's this interesting thing. So James T. Kirk, product of a very good world, the Federation, he is always the alpha leader, and he so easily adapts to this darker world without like missing a beat. Literally, the minute you see there's a disruption and he's asked to make a choice as an alpha dog in a darker world, he does it without any, like, it is amazing to me how easy it is. I know there's a line in it where he asks his Spock, how were you able to tell that we were not the same thing? And Spock says, well, it must be easier for a civilized person to impersonate a barbarian than a barbarian to impersonate a civilized person. But make no mistake, Mirror Mirror Kirk is not a barbarian. Mirror Mirror Kirk is as much a man of action as our Kirk. He's just ambitious in a very corrupt, conniving way.
Well, maybe I could say, like, what I like about this episode is, I remember watching this as a kid. It blew my little kid mind. I mean, I think I remember it being on TV, and I think I missed the beginning, and, like, I'm just looking at Spock and Kirk and all the other Enterprise crew all dressed so funny, and I was wondering what was going on. I started watching it, and, like, my little kid mind is blown because of all the crazy stuff that's happening with the crew right now. I mean, what's going on? And I was just as confused as Kirk in the episode at the beginning.
Did you find watching it again as an adult that it's interesting? Because I agree. When I watched it,
I was going to tell you what I found the most interesting about it is that they really did a great job on the mirror universe. I mean, I feel it's completely believable that this universe could exist, that these characters could behave this way, and I mean, it's plausible to me. I mean, and from what I've read of history, I mean, there are civilizations that have been like this, and it could totally happen. It could totally exist. So it raises the question, why isn't the normal Star Trek universe like this? I mean,
We'll
why
get
is
to
the
that.
mirror universe
We'll
different at
get
all?
to
Why
that
are these universes different?
in a little while. I definitely want to do that. When you saw it again as an adult, because we just both rewatched it again, uh, did it look differently than when you were a kid? I mean, is it, or do you all still see? Like, I agree with you. There's an amazing, the Mirror universe, because I'll do this again like a million times later. It really doesn't seem that different than the regular Star Trek world. And it doesn't even seem that much different from 1960s society, right?
I don't know, Chris.
There's a
I,
certain level of machismo and sexism
yeah,
in the
I
Mirror
mean,
universe that's
yeah,
like almost an episode of Mad Men,
there's a way
you
of
know?
yes, there's a way of looking at the mirror universe where you say, wow, this is more true to life. This is more realistic.
Yes,
And I definitely
that's
had
what I'm
those
trying to say.
thoughts. I definitely had those thoughts watching it, but I don't know. I mean,
I mean, it's almost as if you were remaking Star Trek, you and I, not J.J. Abrams, he's horrible. But if we were remaking the 1960s Star Trek with a 1960s sensibility, wouldn't it look a lot more like the Mirror universe than it would look like the Gene Roddenberry universe?
I don't know. See, I find those questions fascinating. I mean, I don't know the answers. I will say though that I would love to see like Quentin Tarantino. Didn't he say he wanted to make a Star Trek? I would love to
Yeah,
see like what if Quentin Tarantino just did a mirror universe Star Trek
I think it
that
would
just
be.
took place in the mirror universe? I think that
I
would be
think it
like the
would.
greatest Star Trek
I,
of all
I,
time.
in many ways, it is the Tarantino verse. I mean, it's good that you do see that Kirk still finds a way of maintaining his original moral compass because he has two goals, which is to save the defenseless people, and the other goal, which is to get him and his crew back to their original timeline. Now, Spock is amazing. This is one of the best Spock episodes ever, because I mean, there's a band called Spock's Beard, the neo prog band. But this is the one that introduces bearded Spock. And the thing about it is that Mirror Spock, he's fairly consistent from the other dimension. Both of them are creatures of logic, rational in behavior. He is loyal and dedicated. He's a loyal and dedicated subordinate officer. He does not want, he thinks it's safer to be number two than to be number one. He is crueler in his methods and he is less empathetic. It's not clear if he is half human in this universe, but that reveal wouldn't come later into the series anyway. The sense is that Kirk sees. I mean, what did you think of bearded Spock?
You're right about it being one of the greatest Spock episodes. I mean, you really understand Spock's character a lot more. This is why, this episode is really about the characters. You understand all the characters a lot better. Spock doesn't, in both universes, he doesn't want to be the captain because his interest lies in other things. He doesn't want to do the job of being the captain. Kirk is quite obviously enjoys his power and authority in both universes. He enjoys, I think he enjoys the connection he has with his crewmates in both universes. I mean, quite literally in the mirror universe.
No, it actually it's one of the more disturbing. Here's a little spoiler. One of the coders of our universes. It seems that both Kirks have the similar interests in that way. And what you just are alluding to is kind of disturbing.
Right, and Uhura's character is fascinating because she is Uhura just in general is one of the prototype. One of the maybe that's the wrong word, but she's one of the prototype like 60s women where she is coming into a man's world and doing the job that a man used to do. And you can see her fear. You can see her anxiety about that. But she performs.
She's also incredibly proactive in this episode. I mean,
yeah, I was gonna say she performs just as well as any man in the mirror universe, as any of the other male crewmates. She holds her own for sure. She holds
her own against a sexually predatory Sulu.
And I'll say this. Captain Kirk supports her emotionally in the mirror universe, helping her to do her job, do what she needs to do, just as good as any man would do it. I mean, it's
But
it's
she
a,
also takes agency, which I think in a lot of her episodes is missing. She has to, more spoilery, she has to distract Zulu, and she comes up with her plan on her own. She does what she has to do on her own, not through Kirk. That is all her, and she does it masterfully. You also get to see both these two characters who are pretty asexual often on the show really own their own sexuality, own their own. That's a pretty cool scene between the two of them, that cat and mouse scene.
yes. And do you notice too that
An
uh
Asian and an African American woman in 1967 having this kind of oh my God, what's going
yeah,
on?
I
Oh,
noticed that
that's
too.
very
It was good to see them flirt. I mean, it was kind of mind blowing too. I mean, a 67. But yeah, I mean, I really liked how Kirk is like a total feminist in this in this episode,
well,
trying
you're pushing it a little bit, but I get what you're saying.
he's
His heart's
trying
in
to
the right
elevate
place.
he's trying to elevate the status of both Uhura
Yeah.
and his this other woman
No, he is.
in the mirror
He's doing his.
universe. He's trying to help them out. He's trying to bring them into equality with men. I mean, it's I don't know. It's I was surprised to see that.
I will say though, the back to Spock, because Spock is in the same person in so many ways. You know, he's about science. He's about what it means to be human. Even the Spock of our world, we find out at the end, is just as capable of being rude and insults in a very underhand way. McCoy says, "I think we've just been insulted, Jim." But you know, it's interesting because he is such a rational being. Before Kirk, spoiler, beams away, he tries to make an appeal to mirror Spock. He says, "Spock, how long do you think it'll take for this empire to crumble? 240 years." He said, "Look, he says, you're a creature of reason. You're not a creature of emotion. You're rational. Why don't you change?" Because he's arguing, Spock, you're the hope. You are the hope for change from within, not from without. You're the one who can bring down the system. You're the one who can do what's right because you're willing to listen to reason. So this is so important on so many levels. So I want to talk about the social history of this particular episode and why the fact that it takes place, why it came out in April of '67 is so important. So as you know, Roddenberry, very strange. Randall, remind me to do an episode on Roddenberry one day.
Okay,
So
we'll do an episode of Roddenberry. Yeah,
I
there's
believe
some weird stuff there.
he's a weird dude, but he always said that Star Trek was a space western, right? Like it was about the first convoys out into the great American West. Well, I would argue only if you're talking about how the U.S. Army drove the Indians out of their land. What?
You know, Star Trek reminds me more of like an old British Navy voyage with scientists
Absolutely.
on
I
board.
mean, absolutely, you're right. It is absolutely the British Navy in the 18th and 19th century when they would both fight pirates, expand the empire, and also do scientific research. If you watch Master and Commander, which is a lovely film, it's almost like watching Star Trek because you have both the scientist in Paul Bettany and the Captain Kirk in Russell Crowe. And that's the thing. So much of American science fiction, ever since Starship Troopers, and it's what distinguishes American science fiction from British science fiction is that it's always a paramilitary organization in space. So I think this is one of the more subversive episodes that I don't know how Bixby is able to pass through Roddenberry because, if you really think about it, the dark side of the Federation would be the British Navy, would be empire builders, right? So in 1967, America's in its second year of the war in Vietnam, South Vietnam. And this is when things have really started to expand. And this is also when you start to see protests. So in April of '67, for the first time, there's a group called Veterans Against the War. And they join 100,000 protesters in a demonstration in New York City. And it's the first time that people who served in the service are saying this is a wrong war. Just a few months later, President Johnson will ask Congress to temporarily increase taxes by 10% as he's approved an additional 45,000 American troops to fight in the Vietnam War, bringing it up to over 500,000 troops. So here is America, strongest army in the world, just beat World War II strong as a military might, throwing all of its force, which technically was what this episode's about. There's a planet, they have resources, they can't give the resources to the Federation because they don't believe that the Federation will use it for the best purposes. The Federation has the power to just take it from them. They know that. Kirk says the fact that we can but we don't should be in our favor. So now you have the US, which theoretically is a giant power and should be able to just win this war in Vietnam, but can't. And this is the year that soldiers and intellectuals and members of the government are starting to question whether or not the US should stay. So you could argue allegorically, and Star Trek is always allegorical, that Kirk's appeal to the rational Spock is really a mirror of the appeal to politicians and soldiers and all the like, those in the power establishment, to just be rational about the fact that this is an unwinnable war.
It's funny. You're blowing my mind right now. It sounds a lot like the Iraq wars too, actually.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely
our wars
true.
for oil in the Middle East.
Absolutely.
But I'll say something about his appeal in the end. I mean, I think Kirk is wrong. I mean, Kirk is trying to argue to Spock that empires will fall, empires can't last. But I don't know if that's true. Empires might rot for a long time, but I think empires can keep going. I don't think there's anything stopping them.
I think Kirk is being an idealist.
Yes.
And I think that it's true to the character. That's the thing about it. Another thing I like about this, and I think Bixby is aware of Carl Jung's concept of the shadow self. And according to Jung, the shadow self operates as the unknown dark side of a personality. And according to Jung, the shadow is instinctive and irrational. It's prone to physical projection, which is perceived as the personal inferiority, as recognized as a perceived moral deficiency in someone else. So the people that Kirk is dealing with are the shadow versions of his friends. And he's being forced to operate as a shadow version of himself. I think the actors must have had the best time.
Oh, yeah, of course.
One of the best times, because Kirk gets to ramp up his sexuality to a level I've never seen. As I've said before, Uhura gets to ramp up her sexuality, Sulu does. Also, Sulu and Walter Koenig as Chekhov get to ramp up their malevolence. Star Trek has done a number of shows that actually really fall into this. It's not the first or last time you'll see the dark sides of these people, the evil twins, but it's the first time where everybody is evil. So it's completely normalized. Normally it's like, oh, Kirk's been split into half. He's like Jekyll and Hyde, but everyone else on the ship is normal.
Well,
here, everybody is
yes.
abnormal.
Yes, I am really fascinated by this, by the questions it raises. Like, you're probably right to use the word evil, but what makes them evil? It's because everyone just takes what they can take if their power allows it, with no regard to the harm it causes others. Right? Would that be a good summation of the?
That's an excellent summation, and it's normalized, which is what you see in military culture at the time, and unfortunately, I would say even to this day, is that the ends justify the means. And everything in Star Trek's mirror universe, the Terran Empire, all the ends justify the means. That's why people are not punished for killing. It's a weird form of chain of command, to be honest with you, where it's okay to kill to move up the chain of command. No, in that sense, it's the most naive thing, because everything else about empire building, they get on right. But the idea that you can kill to move up the chain of command, you would never have in the British Navy. And I don't know if you'd even have it except under like Stalin. It's true they referenced the Gestapo in this as the tactics of Koenig, so they are drawing a line with fascist groups like the Nazis and the Soviets who did purge from within their own. So I feel like it is a universal, it's not just going after America, it is going after proto-fascism in general.
Well, I'll say assassination is a little much, but yeah, I mean, most situations, most bureaucratic situations, hierarchical organizations, there's a certain degree of office politics that happens where people try to eliminate their competition. Well, and it's malicious. It's completely malicious.
Right. And the parallel of Stalinism and Nazism in that empire is easier to see. they would do so many of these about Nazism and fascism with Romanism that this is a thing that keeps on coming back. Now, keep in mind that World War II is only 20 years ago, roughly, and the fall of Stalin is only 10 years ago, roughly. So the world they're commenting on, almost everyone who wrote for the show has either fought in World War II or Korea, or lived at least through World War II or Korea. They've all lived under the threat of nuclear annihilation. The Cuban Missile Crisis was only 4 years ago. Men are going off into space. So much of what they're referencing isn't history. It's just what's going on.
You know, and I'll say this too. I just want to say this too. Most people don't think of the United States as an empire, but I think it's pretty clear. Like if you just look at it objectively, the United States as an empire has been for hundreds of years now, and the mirror universe in Star Trek is probably closer to our how things work in the United States than it is to the Star Trek universe, I think.
So the legacy of this particular episode is really fascinating because when Star Trek comes back, Star Trek Next Generation, they don't touch this at all. There's like a episode where Q shows Picard, like It's a Wonderful Life, what would have happened if he had never become captain. So you have an alternative universe where things have gone poorly. But the mirror universe is reintroduced in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which is probably one of the grittiest, darkest, and one of my favorites of the Star Trek shows. And then Sisko goes back to the mirror universe. You get more of that. They even involve a character from Voyager, Tuvok, who's a Vulcan. And in that point on, the mirror universe becomes just established Star Trek lore. You know, in that one, they do wear different costumes. They have different ways. It comes back again in Enterprise. Actually, it's pretty cool. If you watch the opening of Star Trek Enterprise, forgive me for not knowing which episode it is, Google it. They go to the opening of Star Trek First Contact. They bring back James Cromwell. And in the opening of Star Trek, the ending of hey, spoiler alert for Star Trek First Contact. In the ending of the original movie, James Cromwell plays Zephyrin Cochrane. And after he goes on his Warp 1 mission, the Vulcans reveal himself and Earth is invited to join the United Federation of Planets. They recreate the exact same scene, but when the Vulcan comes out of his ship, someone shoots him dead with a shotgun. And then in the opening credits of Enterprise, for the first time, they redo the opening credits, which is about the beginning of exploration all the way to the Earth, to space, from the earliest ships to these advanced starships. But in this time, it's with the Terran Empire. So you get to see how it is really an extension of the Roman Empire well into the future. And that's a pretty cool one. But and then in Star Trek Discovery, which is one of the most newest of the Star Treks, they're totally bringing back the Mirror Universe characters. They're bringing in Mirror Universe characters without even letting us know who the original versions of them are. It's completely now deep. It's so deep into Star Trek. I'm sure one day they'll just do a Mirror series because
yes, that's what we want, right, Chris?
All right. Well, they did a fan fiction film. There's some novels about it, but it's as established as Klingons or the Borg. This episode really broke ground. Now, I also want to say that this concept of an alternative universe or a darkest timeline, I think DC Comics came up with an alternative universe just before this one to explain the heroes of the Golden Age, like the Golden Age Flash versus the Silver Age Flash, the modern Flash. So there would be like an Earth 2 where all of the DC heroes from the past now live. And Marvel may have also come up with an alternative universe just around the same time. But for established science fiction shows and for movies, this multiverse really starts, I would argue, in the Mirror, as well as the darkest timeline. And now it's just become trope, right? How many things have we watched where there's an alternative universe now where only bad things have happened, where our hero is the villain or society has fallen, right?
Yeah. Well, I just want to say, like, the whole parallel universe concept is, it's been around in science fiction for a long time. I mean, especially in like.
But I'm saying in TV science fiction, this is the episode that really brings it to the fore, and even in film science fiction.
Yeah, I mean, you're
really
probably right. I mean, I can't think of any precursors in like the mass media where the parallel universe was really introduced with such gusto. I mean, this whole episode just about takes place in the parallel universe.
Yeah, and it's all about the idea that there's some universe out there that's a darkest timeline. You know, Community had a lot of fun with this, but a lot of shows that aren't comedies, Heroes will do this. A lot of shows that do this thing where they're, instead of now having the evil twin, it's like, I escaped from the dimension where Superman is evil. I escaped from the dimension where Lex Luthor rules the world. I mean, this idea that there are iterations and parallels, Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse.
I've just been thinking of something else. I had another thought that maybe the normal Star Trek universe is a little too sanitized because they want in most Star Trek stories they want to get to the aliens, they want to get to the discovery, they want to get to the political philosophical themes of the show. So you can't spend too much time in having the characters go through stuff. You want to get to the stuff, the good stuff, I guess you could say. But it becomes too utopian and too unrealistic, I guess. And maybe the mirror universe is like an antidote to that.
I think you're onto something. I think you spend so much time watching ideal archetypes doing ideal archetypal things. Even if it's a Spider-Man, even if he's like us, his moral compass is above us.
Always making the correct decisions too. Right?
You want to see what would a self-serving, what would a Spider-Man who's not as nice as us be like? What would a Batman who kills is like? What if Superman used all of his wonderful powers not for truth, justice, in the American way, but just for the opposite? What a great badass would he be?
Right. Well, what if just as something simple as what if Superman just screwed up, and accidentally killed somebody, that was innocent? I mean, it never happens in normal Superman, but it could easily happen.
The idea of a group of people who are just space pirates. There is a really good show. We'll have to do another episode written by Terry Nation, who created the Daleks on Doctor Who, called Blake 7. And they're just a bunch of renegade pirates, fighting the Federation, who's evil, for several seasons. And it shows the Federation as the evil empire. I strongly recommend it. It's available on YouTube, folks. So you can totally watch Blake 7. It's all there. I mean, the 60s TV shows that are popular, like I Dream of Jeannie or The Twilight Zone or The Beverly Hillbillies or The Prisoner of the Saint, all of them had, either they were all about metaphor, either they were about satire or they were about exploring society through metaphor. Maybe not the same, but certainly The Prisoner, which is a great show, or a show like The Beverly Hillbillies or I Dream of Jeannie and The Twilight Zone. They're all using fantasy to draw a light in our own world, either for laughs or for introspection. And I think this is certainly one of the best. It's made a lot of lists for the best episode of science fiction, the best episode of Star Trek. But it really does show you that at least we tend to think that we're always living in the golden age of TV. But the fact that Star Trek would hire real science fiction writers and let them do real science fiction stories like this is a testament to maybe why we're still watching it today, 50 plus years later. What do you think, Randall?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, the reason it ever got produced is an accident. I mean, I don't know if we have time to tell. I have time to tell that story, but
tell it.
Okay. Well, the story I read this in an interview with Lucille Ball years ago. She claims that so she was in charge at Desi Arnaz Productions. She was in charge of O'Kane new projects, and at the time, well, this script pilot for the first Star Trek was on her desk, and it just said Star Trek on the cover. And at the time, there were these TV shows that were really popular. This is the 60s. There were these shows where they'd get celebrity game shows. They'd get a bunch of celebrities on and have them do stupid stuff, hijinks. And she looked at the title, Star Trek, and she thought that this was one of those celebrity game shows. So,
like Hollywood Squares.
Right, like Hollywood Squares.
Game.
Exactly. So without even opening the cover, this is according to Lucille Ball, without even opening the cover, she greenlit it. And then a year into production, she visits the set or something, and she's like, what the hell is this? and they had to tell her, and she just all right, whatever. And she just left, and that was it. That's how it got on the air.
Well, awesome. I can't top that. So, Randall, thanks for that, for ending us so well. Until the next time, I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
Be safe, be well.